The small town of Crestwood was a place where time seemed to slow, where whispers clung to the fog, and where stories, especially the ones no one dared tell, drifted between the old, brick buildings like smoke. At the heart of Crestwood stood the Blackwell Public Library, a grand structure of dark stone and stained glass, its tall, arched windows casting long shadows across the street. The townsfolk often spoke of its history, how it had been built on the foundations of a burned-down manor in the late 1800s, how some rooms had been sealed for decades, and how there were parts of the building even the librarians avoided. But no story was more whispered, more cautiously exchanged between those who claimed to know, than that of the locked room above the library. For years, the attic remained a silent enigma. The heavy oak door at the top of the spiral staircase was chained shut, a rusted padlock dangling like an iron warning. A small brass plaque on the door read, "Staff only. Restricted access." But even the staff knew better than to question what lay beyond. Some said it was storage, some a forgotten archive. Others spoke of strange sounds, soft footsteps, whispers that seeped through the floorboards late at night. And there were those who claimed, with eyes wide and voices hushed, that the attic wasn't empty at all. It began, as many stories do, with curiosity. Rebecca Cole was a graduate student at the local university, working late into the night for her thesis on historic architecture. She'd been studying the Blackwell Library's design for months, fascinated by its unusual layout and the hints of something older beneath its foundations. One stormy evening, as rain lashed against the stained glass windows and the wind howled through the cracks, she noticed something peculiar, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from above her, as if someone, or something, was moving about in the attic. She paused, straining to listen. The library was supposed to be empty. Thomas Reed, the elderly librarian, had left hours earlier, locking up behind him. But the sound persisted, soft and insistent. Curiosity gnawed at her, and against her better judgment, she decided to investigate. The staircase leading to the attic was narrow, the wood creaking underfoot. Dust motes swirled in the air like tiny ghosts, illuminated by the flickering light of her phone's flashlight. When she reached the top, she found the door exactly as it had always been, chained, padlocked, and untouched for years. Yet the sound, soft, almost like a whisper, seemed to seep from beneath it. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the lock. The whispering stopped. A chill ran through her, and she retreated, descending the stairs in a rush. That night, she couldn't sleep. The whispers lingered in her mind, curling around her thoughts like smoke. By morning, she'd made a decision: she would uncover the secrets of the locked room. The following day, she returned to the library and approached Thomas Reed. The old man's eyes darkened when she mentioned the attic. He shook his head, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "That room," he said quietly, "is best left undisturbed." "But what's inside?" she pressed. Thomas sighed, as if the weight of years rested on his shoulders. "I don't know. No one does. It's been locked since before I started working here. They say it was sealed after an incident." "What kind of incident?" He hesitated, then spoke in a whisper barely audible. "A disappearance. A man named Harold Blackwell, he was the last one to go inside. After that, they locked the door and never spoke of it again." Rebecca's heart pounded. A mystery, hidden away for decades. She had to know more. Over the next few days, she dug into the library's archives, poring over old newspapers, journals, and blueprints. She found mentions of Harold Blackwell, the library's founder, who had been a respected figure in town until the day he vanished without a trace in 1912. His last known location: the attic room above the library. There were other accounts, too: strange sightings of a figure in the upper windows, reports of books moving on their own, sudden drops in temperature, and whispers in the dead of night. One journal entry, written by a librarian in 1957, described hearing a voice calling my name from the attic, though no one else was there. Rebecca's obsession grew. She contacted Dr. Alan Grayson, a historian and paranormal researcher known for his work on haunted locations. Together, they planned an overnight investigation of the library, determined to uncover the truth. On the night of the investigation, a storm rolled in, lightning illuminating the sky in jagged flashes. The library felt alive, the air thick with anticipation. They set up cameras, audio recorders, and EMF detectors, their equipment blinking and humming in the dark. As the hours crept by, the temperature dropped. Their breath fogged in the air, and the faint scent of smoke, old, acrid, lingering, filled the room. At midnight, they heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping from the attic. The same sound Rebecca had heard weeks before. They ascended the staircase, their footsteps slow, deliberate. The locked door loomed before them, the padlock gleaming in the beam of their flashlights. Alan reached out, his hand steady. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Before they could touch the lock, the whispers began. Faint at first, then louder, growing in intensity until the air seemed to vibrate with them. A cold wind swept through the hallway, extinguishing their lights, plunging them into darkness. Rebecca gasped, her heart hammering. She could feel it, something standing just beyond the door, watching, waiting. And then, the lock snapped open with a sharp, metallic click. They exchanged a glance, fear, disbelief, determination, and slowly pushed the door open. The room was a time capsule. Dust-coated shelves lined the walls, filled with old books, photographs, and artifacts from another era. A large, circular rug covered the center of the floor, and in its middle stood a wooden chair, empty but facing them as if someone had just left it. The air was heavy, almost pressing down on them. The scent of smoke was stronger here, mingled with something else, decay, perhaps, or something more ancient. Rebecca's flashlight beam landed on an old photograph lying on the floor. She picked it up, wiping the dust away. It was Harold Blackwell, standing beside the very chair that now sat before them. His eyes seemed to follow her, a faint smirk playing on his lips. And then, the whispers changed. They weren't random anymore. They were words. "Help me, trapped, the fire, they're still here." The temperature plummeted. Frost bloomed across the walls, and the lights of their equipment flickered wildly. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as a shadow began to form in the corner of the room, tall, indistinct, but unmistakably human. The shape moved closer, its face just out of reach, the edges of its form shifting like smoke. Alan tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His eyes were wide, fixed on the figure. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. The lock snapped back into place, sealing them inside. Panic set in. Rebecca pounded on the door, her voice hoarse with fear. Alan tried to break the lock, but the metal held firm, unyielding. The shadow loomed larger, the whispers deafening. "Let us out!" Rebecca screamed, her voice cracking. The figure paused, tilting its head as if considering them. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo from the walls themselves, it whispered, "Find the book. Free us." The figure dissolved into smoke, fading into the walls. The temperature rose slowly, the frost receding. The lights of their equipment steadied. And then, the lock clicked open. They fled the room, gasping for air, their bodies trembling. The door swung shut behind them with a final, echoing thud. They didn't speak for a long time. When they finally did, Rebecca's voice was soft, almost broken. What did it mean? Find the book. Alan shook his head, still pale. I don't know. But I think we've only scratched the surface. In the days that followed, they scoured the library, searching for the book the voice had mentioned. They found it hidden behind a false panel in the archives, an old, leather-bound journal filled with handwritten entries. The ink was faded, but one passage stood out, written in a hurried, shaky hand. They are trapped. The fire sealed them in. The attic is their prison, and the library their tomb. We must never open the door again. Rebecca closed the book, her hands trembling. But the door was open now. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Rebecca sat alone in her apartment that night, the journal on her lap, its brittle pages whispering as she turned them. The words trapped, the fire sealed them in, their prison echoed in her mind like a curse. Her phone buzzed, Alan's message. Alan, don't go back there alone. There's more we don't understand. I'm worried for you. But she couldn't help it. The pull was too strong. The next day, under the pale winter sun, she returned to the library. The air seemed different, denser, almost charged, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Thomas Reed was at the front desk, his eyes hollow and rimmed with dark circles. When he saw her, he stiffened. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly, barely looking up. Rebecca hesitated, then whispered, Thomas, what happened to Harold Blackwell? I need to know. Thomas closed his eyes, a deep sigh escaping his lips. His voice dropped to a near whisper. They say Blackwell wasn't alone in that room. The night of the fire, he locked himself up there to perform some ritual. No one knows what for. But after the fire, people heard voices, children's laughter, a woman weeping, footsteps when the library was empty. Some believe he trapped something inside, or maybe, someone. Rebecca's pulse quickened. Who? Thomas shook his head. No one knows for sure. Some say it was his family. Others say it was something older. Her skin prickled with cold. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. The journal lay on her desk, open to a page she hadn't noticed before. A strange symbol was drawn there, an intricate knot, looping over itself endlessly. Beneath it, a single word, vinculum. She searched online for the term. It was Latin, a bond, a chain, a binding. The deeper she looked, the more she uncovered, folklore of spirits bound to a place through fire and blood, unable to pass on until the bond was broken. Her phone buzzed again, this time, a voicemail from Alan. But when she played it back, it wasn't Alan's voice she heard. It was whispering. Dozens of voices, layered and urgent, speaking all at once in a language she couldn't understand. And in the background, the sound of crackling fire. Rebecca felt her blood run cold. She called Alan immediately, but the line was dead. She tried again, nothing. Desperation gnawed at her, and despite the hour, she grabbed her coat and raced to the library. The building loomed in the dark, its windows like hollow eyes staring down at her. The wind howled through the empty streets as she approached the doors. They were unlocked. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the scent of smoke and old books. The lights flickered, casting long, twisting shadows across the marble floor. She called out, "Alan! Thomas!" No answer. As she climbed the spiral staircase toward the attic, the temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the banister beneath her hand, and her breath hung in the air in ghostly clouds. The door to the attic was ajar. Inside, Alan stood by the chair in the center of the room, his back to her. He didn't move, didn't speak. His flashlight lay on the floor, its beam casting eerie shapes across the walls. "Alan," she whispered. He turned slowly, his eyes vacant, his face pale as wax. "They're waiting," he said softly. "They're always waiting." The shadows in the room seemed to writhe, twisting together, forming vague shapes, faces contorted in silent screams, hands clawing at the walls, eyes wide with fear. The whispers surged, deafening now, as if the walls themselves were speaking. And then Rebecca saw it, a figure in the corner, watching. A man in an old-fashioned suit, his features obscured by smoke. He lifted his hand, pointing at the journal Rebecca still held. "You must finish it," the whisper voices intoned. "Complete the bond. Break the chain, or join us." Her hands trembled. The journal pages turned on their own, stopping on the symbol, the vinculum. Beneath it, a new line had appeared, as if written in fresh ink. "To release the bound, one must feed the fire." A sudden gust of wind blew through the attic, snuffing out her flashlight, leaving her in darkness. The only light came from the edges of the room, where faint, glowing embers seemed to burn, pulsing like dying stars. Rebecca knew what she had to do. She tore the page with the vinculum symbol from the journal and held it to the flickering embers. The moment the paper caught flame, a piercing scream tore through the air, a sound that was not human, not entirely of this world. The shadows recoiled, the temperature spiked, and the walls shuddered as if the entire building were alive and in pain. Alan collapsed to the floor, gasping. Rebecca felt a force pulling at her, as if unseen hands were trying to drag her into the fire. She fought against it, her body straining, her mind screaming. Then, silence. The embers died. The whispers faded. The room fell still. Alan groaned, sitting up. His eyes cleared, confusion washing over his face. What happened?" Rebecca didn't answer. She stared at the now blank page in her hand, the words and symbol burned away. The journal was quiet. The shadows were gone. But deep in the walls of the library, she thought she could still hear them, faint, distant, but there. Waiting. Days passed. Rebecca stayed away from the library, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The dreams came at night, Alan standing in the attic, whispering words she couldn't understand. The figure in the old-fashioned suit staring at her from behind cracked glass. The journal, burning and reforming itself in her hands, its pages endless, its ink alive. Alan seemed changed too. He grew distant, hollow. His eyes darted to the corners of rooms as if seeing things others couldn't. He spoke less, and when he did, it was often in riddles. "They're not gone," he whispered once, when Rebecca tried to ask about the night in the attic. "The fire, it just opened the door wider." Rebecca's skin crawled. She decided to visit Thomas Reed again, but the library was closed, shut down for maintenance, the sign said, though the windows were dark and no sounds came from within. That night, Rebecca received a package at her apartment. No return address. Just a plain envelope, slightly singed, with her name scrawled in looping, spidery handwriting. Inside, there was a single photograph, the attic room, as it looked decades ago. In the center stood a group of people in old-fashioned clothing, black wool, unmistakably, with a stern expression. Thomas Reed, much younger, barely recognizable. And in the back, a woman holding a child. Rebecca felt a jolt in her chest. The child's face was eerily familiar, it looked like Alan. Her phone buzzed. A message, unsigned. The bond is not broken. You are part of it now. Rebecca's hands trembled as she turned the photo over. Written in faded ink. Vinculum perpetuum. The next day, Alan was gone. His apartment was empty, his phone disconnected. It was as if he had never existed. Even Thomas Reed had disappeared. When Rebecca called the library, the number was out of service. When she went in person, the building was locked, the windows boarded up. But every night, she still heard them. The whispers in the walls. The faint, crackling sound of fire. The journal on her shelf, its pages now blank, but pulsing under her fingertips, alive, waiting. One night, unable to bear it anymore, she opened the journal again. A fresh line had appeared. Once marked, the chain remains. The story does not end here. Rebecca closed the book, her heart racing, and looked out her window. Across the street, standing under the dim glow of a street lamp, was the figure in the old-fashioned suit. Watching her. He lifted a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. And then, he was gone. Rebecca knew what she had to do. She packed a bag, the journal, a flashlight, matches, and an old camera. She would go back one last time, to the place where it all began. The library wasn't just a building, it was a prison. And whatever was trapped inside, she was bound to it now. As she approached the boarded-up doors that night, a key lay waiting on the steps. Old, heavy, and cold to the touch. The library welcomed her back with a groan of ancient wood. Inside, the air pulsed with heat and cold, a shifting, restless energy. The shadows seemed to part for her, guiding her toward the attic stairs. At the top, the door stood open. The chair was gone. The walls shimmered as if breathing. Rebecca stepped inside. And the door slammed shut behind her. The journal flipped open in her hands, the pages turning rapidly, faster than she could follow, until they stopped on a single phrase, written in bold, dark ink that seemed to bleed across the page. The fire must be fed. The story must continue. And then, the room filled with light, blazing, golden, blinding. Faces emerged from the walls, their mouths open in silent screams. The figure in the suit stepped forward, his eyes burning coals. Rebecca understood, in that moment, the terrible truth: she was part of the library's story now. A chapter in an endless book. The last thing she saw was the journal, its cover closing slowly, the title etched in blackened letters. The locked room above the library. And then, silence. Weeks later, the library reopened, freshly painted, the attic sealed once more. A new librarian, smiling politely, greeted visitors at the door. And if you listen closely, in the quiet hours between dusk and dawn, you can still hear the faint sound of whispering, just beyond the shelves. Waiting. Months passed. The library became busier than ever. Families browsed the shelves, children read picture books under the warm glow of antique lamps, and students studied late into the night. The locked room above was rarely mentioned, just a whisper in the quiet corners, an oddity few cared to explore. But for those who did ask, there were always stories. They'd say the library seemed alive sometimes, books falling from shelves without cause, the faint smell of smoke lingering in certain aisles, cold drafts in rooms where no windows opened. A few claimed they heard whispers when the building was empty, names spoken softly, like a forgotten roll call. And in the attic, though the door remained sealed and the key long lost, some swore they saw a figure standing at the window after dark. A tall man in an old-fashioned suit, watching. Rebecca's apartment, meanwhile, had been abandoned. Her mail piled up, her phone disconnected. Neighbors claimed she left in the middle of the night, suitcase in hand, never to return. Alan's name no longer appeared in any records, no job history, no apartment lease, no bank accounts. It was as if he had never existed. But in the library, if you knew where to look, you might still find the journal. It sits tucked behind the reference section, on a shelf few people ever touch, its spine cracked and pages yellowed. If you open it, you'll see that the story continues, not in past tense, but in present. And new names have appeared on the pages. Your name, perhaps, or the names of those who linger too long in the wrong part of the library. The last page remains blank, waiting for the next chapter. And if you stay after closing, when the lights dim and the building grows quiet, you might hear it, the faint tick-tick of a clock long since broken, the rustle of unseen pages turning, and a whisper, so soft you can barely hear it. The story is never over. Dear listener, thank you for joining me on this chilling journey through the locked room above the library. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more eerie tales and dark mysteries. Your support helps us keep the stories alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and good night.